And I think the breaking point for me was when we were asked to fold the pram with a sleeping baby in it. You want me to pick up the baby, wake them up, fold a pram with one hand, take off all the stuff that's hanging from the pram, and going, this is just, aren't we meant to be welcome on the train?
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Wolmar, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. We have two very interesting interviews today. The first is with Joe Thomas and Abby Taylor from the Campaign for Family-Friendly Trains, who are going to be talking to you about just what it says on the tin, how to make our passenger railways more accessible to people with children. We also, continuing on the rail theme, have an interview with Steve Montgomery, who is the managing director of First Rail, part of First Group, who have a campaign of their own to make it easier to introduce open access passenger train services on the rail network in Great Britain. But before that, we have some breaking news, because on the day that we're recording this episode, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK government has made a very significant speech in Oxfordshire about growth in the British economy, but which featured a number of very significant announcements across the modes in relation to transport. And you've been studying this closely, Christian.
Yes, indeed. And of course, it's been widely trailed, as these things always are these days. There was barely anything that hadn't been trailed in the speech. But in terms of transport, this is very significant indeed, because there's three aspects, three schemes that she talked about. So one was the Lower Thames crossing, which is a huge, estimated £9 billion road underneath the Thames, below the Dartford tunnel and bridge to reduce the congestion there. The other one is an emphasis on East-West Rail, which is the connection between Oxford and Cambridge, where actually they're going to reach halfway. They're going to reach to the West Coast Main Line, but then they had not finished the design of the route, and she had some things to say about that, which Mark, you'll update us on. But let's just start with Heathrow, which is the on-off mega project of the UK, really, because in 2009 it was it was basically kicked into touch, and they said, well, we're not going to do this after years of debate, and then it was raised again, and there was all sorts of other things. There was the Boris Airport. Do you remember that, Mark? That was quite like, they was going to have an airport in the.
This was put forward as an alternative to the third runway proposal, wasn't it?
As
by
a
Mayor
Thames
Johnson.
estuary. And then they gave, one of the reasons they gave the go ahead to HS2 was because they were not kind of going ahead with the Heathrow Airport, a third runway. And now it's back on track, apparently, that we're going to get this massive third runway, which takes out a huge chunk of Hillingdon and I think Surrey, a bit of Surrey countryside. It's just such a huge scale, so expensive, so kind of dependent on pushing through the environmental aspects, on also getting the agreement of the CAA and how it's going to be funded and how much money BAA, the airport owners, will get, and so on. I can't see this really happening until 2040, probably. Once it starts this whole planning process again, and it meets all the opposition. And I doubt by then that they'll have the energy to kind of continue with it, given the fact that it goes against the net zero consideration. There's just no way you can equate the two. So what's your thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, of course, the government strenuously asserts that it can reconcile these growth-driven ambitions to expand not just Heathrow, but other airports in the southeast of England with its net zero commitments. One of the things they cite in that regard is the advent of sustainable aviation fuel, which loyal listeners will know is a subject that we delved into with the Aviation Environment Federation in an earlier episode of
Series
Calling All
2, Episode
Stations.
9. I've just looked it up and listened to it, actually. And the notion that there'll be any significant amounts of sustainable fuel is just pure nonsense. I mean, when it was explained to us, essentially this is reused chip oil, chip fat oil, and from despite the fact there are lots of McDonald's in America and some here, and there's lots of fish and chip shops, the notion that you could run a lot of aircraft on this supposedly sustainable fuel is absolutely pure nonsense. And I don't know why they're so hooked on it, but then they've been hooked on driverless cars, they've been hooked on maglev. There's always hooked on these kind of technological solutions to things that do not have a technological solution.
And of course, although modern aircraft, I think it's fair to say, are generally considerably quieter than some of their predecessors of the 1960s and 70s, they are still noisy for those who are overflown by them in residential neighborhoods. And there's whatever fuel you burn in the aircraft, it doesn't make it any quieter, as I understand it.
That's right. And the notion that you're going to get electric planes, forget that one as well. It seems absolutely impossible because you can't carry the weight of the batteries that you would need to get across the Atlantic. It just is completely fanciful. So we're stuck with that technology. So how they equate this, there's no worked out figures. They haven't explained that, Heathrow the third runway is supposed to cater for 60 million people or something a year. I mean, something kind of enormous, doubling, or not quite doubling. Heathrow, I think, is at 75 or 80 million. So, but certainly increasing it vastly. It's just going to cause such ructions. And of course, it's a lot of.
So why then, Christian? What's your analysis of why the government has decided to do this?
Well, I was just going to come on to that. I mean, there's a great loss of credibility because many of the front benchers are now going to apparently be pushing for it. Or I suspect maybe there might be some resignations eventually. Precisely those who were opposed to it a few years ago. I think this is an act of desperation. I just think that, that they're so hooked on this idea of growth and they want to. This is symbolic more than anything, Mark, because it's not really, probably they don't even believe it's really going to happen. I heard Nick Thomas Simmons talking about this on the radio, and they just seem completely oblivious of any considerations other than growth. And, it was then pointed out that most of these extra flights will actually be just transit flights. They'll just be, dropping people off at Heathrow and taking them off somewhere else. Howard Davis, who's wrote a report on this some years ago and is very pro the idea, was also on the radio later on saying, why should people in Scotland have to transit via Schiphol? It would be better if they're transited via Heathrow. And Sarah Montague on the radio then said, well, actually, maybe the people of West London will be delighted that they're changing at Schiphol and not in Heathrow. So it's very difficult to work out the motivation of this other than total panic, that they think that this will deliver growth, that it will give the idea that we are on a growth agenda and therefore kind of fit in with their whole growth idea. But I don't think it will work. I don't think it's going to stimulate much growth at all in the near future.
So there are a couple of other major elements to this speech, Christian. Which one would you like to take next?
The Lower Thames crossing. Only this weekend, I was talking at a fringe meeting organised by the Transport Action Network and ASLEF about the Lower Thames crossing to Labour Party's Eastern Region Annual Conference. And it was pretty clear that there was widespread opposition to this scheme, not least because it's costing £9 billion, and even that figure is likely to be greatly increased, as always happens. And also, they pointed out that this will, in a way, stymie the potential for rail freight to increase on this kind of north-south route, and that will make it more difficult for rail freight because the economics won't work so well. And again, it does seem to be fly in the face completely of the wider environmental agenda of the Labour Party, doesn't it, Mark?
Well, and of course, one of the curious facets of the Chancellor's statement on the Lower Thames crossing was, in fact, it was neither approval or otherwise for the scheme going ahead, because that's still subject to a quasi-judicial planning decision. But and this was confirming something that had been previously reported in the news media, that the government is exploring the possibility of privately financing the Lower Thames crossing. So presumably on some kind of return to a private finance initiative, PFI type initiative, whereby the private sector puts up the money to build it and then recovers the money through tolls.
Well, we have one toll road like that in this country, really, don't we? One road. We have some bridges, but we have one road, the M6 extension, which bypass, as it were, which is operated that way and has been something of a failure because lots of people keep on using the old route because they don't want to pay the extra five or what to use it. And again, it's not an easy way to fund things. It's not kind of free money. And because we're going to get the Silvertown Tunnel opening in April in London, which is also going to have a toll on it and is a private finance initiative scheme. And there are wide predictions that they're not going to meet their targets, and that the taxpayer is going to end up having, or ratepayer is going to have to pay for a lot of it.
So we've covered aviation from the Chancellor's speech, we've covered roads, and then of course there was a rail scheme which featured as well.
That's East West Rail, and you've been having a look at that for quite a long time, I think.
I've sort of got deeply invested personal history in this because I grew up in a village that was served by the old East West Railway that used to run between Oxford, Bedford, and Cambridge. So I've always taken a close interest in the restoration of the link. But of course, the route that's now proposed is rather different on the Bedford to Cambridge stretch because the old line was built over. And it's going to go through, intersect with the East Coast main line at a place called Tempsford, a tiny village, but which happens to have nearby a very famous former World War II aerodrome. But there now seems to be plans for enormous development there at this intersection between the two lines, leading as to part of a scheme for a sort of arc of development and sort of high-tech industries between Oxford, Milton Keynes, Bedford and Cambridge. And this was an idea that the previous government was very keen on until they adopted their levelling up agenda for the Midlands and the North. And now the Labour government seems to have rediscovered it as part of their growth mission.
Well, in a rational world, of course, the railway company or Network Rail or East West Rail, whoever's developing this, would be allowed to profit from that development and pay for the railway out of the profits of that development. And that's what they do in Japan, where, as you know, I've been recently. But they don't do that in the UK, apart from on the Metropolitan Railway, which is rather a long time ago, nearly 100 years ago now. They were allowed to develop the land around them uniquely, but otherwise railways can't do that. And so the extra value that this will give to lots of developers will not go towards funding that railway. And indeed, that railway will not be electrified, which is shocking in this day and age. But let's hope that they change their mind over that.
That's certainly a curious feature of East West Rail, isn't it, Christian? I believe there's plans to use the East West Railway for much more freight as well. That was originally in the sort of concept, which was for it to be a passenger commuter railway, and that itself causes some controversy with some of the communities through which it will pass, because they're worried about the noise and vibration impact from freight trains, as neighbours sometimes are in these situations.
Well, they always seem to be more worried about this. Well, yeah, we built a whole network of motorways around the country, and nobody ever seemed to argue about that. But anyway,
and I think what's also perhaps been skipped over in terms of the East-West Rail corridor that was announced today is that there is a road scheme in there as well, which is to improve the A428 between Bedford and Cambridge, which will be presumably delivered much sooner than the rail scheme, which is effectively is on a greenfield site. And I'm not sure to what extent we'll see what emerges. That's a resurrection of the previous government's plan to have an expressway, what they called an expressway between Oxford and Cambridge, that would have kind of run parallel with the railway. So that was a scheme that was dropped several years ago, but we may be seeing a sort of partial revival of that idea.
Yes, I'm not sure what an expressway is. Presumably a dual carriageway or something, but
I think it's
quite a motorway.
It's a slightly less scary name for a road that's more or less a motorway. Yeah, I guess.
Well, but to sum up, Mark, I think is today the day that basically Labour has lost any chance of presenting green credentials, and indeed, is it the day when they'll find that they lose a lot of support to the Greens?
I think this is a subject we will be returning to in further episodes of Calling All Stations.
For something slightly different, I thought that we ought to have a talk with the campaign for family-friendly trains. This is something we do badly in the UK, because when I go abroad, trains in Germany and Norway and places, you often see that there's accommodation for children, or there's a play area, or the seating is such that it's much more easy to travel with family. And yet in the UK, we try and cram in so many seats that often there is really no space left for anybody traveling with kids. And indeed, sometimes I think that people with children are sort of somewhat frowned upon by other rail passengers. So I'm joined by Joe Thomas and Abby Taylor, who've created the campaign for family-friendly trains. So welcome to Calling All Stations. What prompted you to create this campaign?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us today. The campaign came out of a group of parents uniting on social media after all having had bad experiences travelling on the rail network with our children. I have a almost 7-year-old called Stanley, who is a big rail enthusiast. We spend a lot of time waving at the trains at mostly Stockport station. And when he was smaller, I had many experiences of trying to travel on the trains. I have a disability, so I rely very much on the trains to get around. And we all of us who joined the campaign found that when we travelled with our children, we were encouraged to, well, we were often told that we needed to fold the prams and pushchairs in order to board the train with a child. There are many policies that train operating companies have which make it very, very difficult to travel with a child. That the folding of pram policy, for example, is really, really difficult to deal with when you're trying to juggle a baby at the same time and all of the paraphernalia that comes with a child. We really want to encourage parents we want to create the conditions for parents to be able to use the rail network, because it's such a great way to get around the country. There are environmental reasons, there are safety reasons, and it's become something that's very important to all of us.
No, absolutely. I mean, what's the basis of that particular policy? Have you found out why they insist on trams being folded?
We don't actually really know. It's just a historical thing that has just never really. It's not that it's never been challenged. One of our campaign members has done some research and shown that there is there've been various sort of news articles over well, actually centuries, I believe, about what should be done about prams on trains. So since luggage vans stopped being a thing, there was no longer somewhere really obvious to put a pushchair. But of course, children aren't luggage. And it seems somewhat baffling that, I mean, it's great, it's really important that we can take bikes, for example, on trains, that there is reservable space for bikes on trains. But it seems somewhat baffling that we don't create space, reservable dedicated space for little people, for human beings.
Absolutely.
Just because they're small.
Joe, what's your experience of this, and what prompted you to join this campaign? And I see you're looking after little Lily, so we may get interrupted a bit, but she's welcome to appear on Calling All Stations.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for having us on the show. But as Lily's interruptions will show, modern life doesn't quite. It can't always. Little people always seem to have special needs and special attention, and that hasn't quite been reflected in the rail network. My involvement arose because I failed my driving test when my wife was pregnant with our first child. So when our first child was born, we didn't have a car, and then we found out that we didn't really need it because we had the benefit of living close to the DLR, close to Thames Link, and we got our supermarket food delivered. And so the only regular journey we were making, which was really difficult, was going down to Cornwall and Wales to see friends. And at that time, GWR was transferring from I think they were the old class 125s to what I call the flying cucumbers, the big green trains.
Hitachi trains, yes. Your knowledge is great. Yes, no, 125s to Hitachis, yes.
And it struck me that this was a chance to massively upgrade the trains and they never took advantage of the fact that as this is an opportunity going, think about the number of children that go to the bucket and spade holidays down in Cornwall.
Yeah.
Why have they not made a chance, an opportunity to make a specialist provision for those under fives who need their prams? And I think the breaking point for me was when we were asked to fold the pram with a sleeping baby in it. And
yes,
you want me to pick up the baby, wake them up, fold a pram with one hand, take off all the stuff that's hanging from the pram, and going, aren't we meant to be welcome on the train? And then it got me thinking about how much more stressful it was compared to when I went to university. You threw on a rucksack, you bought a ticket, you flew through the ticket barriers, you got on the train, and you found the free. And then now it's with lots of small people, it's much more challenging, because even reserving ticket, it's like, am I going to have a table? Is that table going to be near the toilet? Is that going to be now near the is it going to be in the same room as the near the because the Hitachi trains do have these large luggage compartments, which sometimes the conductor opens for you, which you can just about squeeze a pram in, or you can put it in the bike reservation place, but then you're always worried that a bike's going to get on. So
yes, I must say, slightly off piste, but I'm a heavy user of bikes on trains, and those bike compartments are an absolute nightmare for bikes.
Yeah,
because you have to hang the bike up on a hook, and I am fit enough to do this, but certainly my wife isn't, and lots of other people aren't.
I don't know how you're meant to do that with heavy panniers as well, but I mean,
You can't. You have to take the panniers off. Right. So anyway, okay. I mean, what would you like to see? What would you want on the trains? And can any of this be done, given that the design of the trains are there? And is it possible to change things?
well, the when we've spoken to train operating companies, they have said they are moving to more modular designs for their new fleets, so that it's easier to take out seats and put them back in, depending on the nature of the traffic on the journey. So
Right.
we are realistic. We are not expecting every single train company to immediately take out X number of seats next week. But what we want to really ensure is that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated, and that when they're designing and specifying and procuring trains now, the interests of every single age, because you're going to have 5 generations on the same train, between newborn babies all the way up to senior citizens, and they're all going to have very different needs and different requirements, and the train needs to meet those requirements if it is genuinely going to be a public service.
Okay, so you're working for your grandchildren as well as your children. Your children will probably be too old by then, but good on you. Abby, have you had any dealings with train companies over this, and what has the response been?
We have. We've met with most of the train operating companies over the lifetime of the campaign. We've met with the Department for Transport and RSSB and various other rail industry bodies. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think we've only met with one train operating company who didn't think that this was an important issue. But the majority of teams that we've met with have said, yes, this is absolutely something that we should be doing, and we'd like to be considering it. But also recognizing the difficulties that they can't just take out seats, just make a decision, take out some seats and put in a flexible space that can be used for buggies if they're needed. We know that this is a long-term project. But there are also lots and lots of things that train operating companies can do around the edges as they're working towards solutions,
such as what?
Such as it's very difficult to find what is a train operating company's policy. And so we're encouraging train operating companies to be more transparent with their information for parents, for example, on their websites about what their policies are for the expectations of parents getting onto a train.
Yes, that's right. They have sections on bicycles and sections on all sorts of wheelchair users. They could have a section on children. That's what you're suggesting, right?
Yes, and several of them have built those in already. Customer service training is really, really vital, really important here. And lots of there are many different roles, obviously, on the railways, the conductors, dispatchers, people working the ticket barriers. We're encouraging train operating companies to build consideration of the needs of families into the training that they do, so that people know to clock, oh, there's someone there waiting with a pram. They probably need to know where they're most likely to find some kind of modular space where they can be, if there is some. Give them assistance getting onto the train, extending passenger assist to families. Is a relatively simple thing that certainly Southeastern, I believe, have introduced, and others have been talking about. Even things as simple as enabling parents to use the ramps to get onto the train, because it is extraordinarily difficult, especially when you're a parent travelling on your own, as I often was with my son when he was small. If I go to visit my family in Shrewsbury, getting onto the train with a pram by myself, extremely difficult, and you're sometimes you're almost overwhelmingly reliant on the generosity of the general public to help you to get onto the train. And my experience, I had an experience once when my son was really small, asking a member of Avanti staff how do I get my buggy onto the train, because the gap between the platform edge and the train was really, really high. And she said, oh, well, you have to lift it. And I was like, but I physically can't. I've not long had a cesarean section to have my baby. And the staff weren't allowed to help me at that time. So I was reliant on other travellers to help me to get onto
Yes,
the train.
because of health and safety. Yes.
Exactly.
Has that changed? You said at the time. I mean,
I
has
don't
that
know if
changed?
it has. I don't know if it has for Avanti. I'm not sure actually. I can't speak for certain on that front. But knowing that some TOCs are willing and able to extend passenger assist to parents, saying then they can put down a ramp, and then the health and safety issue in theory then disappears.
Right.
So putting reservable space, designated space for pushchairs and prams on the train is the absolute top priority. But that doesn't mean that TOCs can't do other things in the meantime as they're working towards that, when they're not going through a refurbishment or a new commission.
Right, Joe. What have you got specific ideas, or do you just kind of follow those that Abby has set out? Do unmute yourself.
Yeah, if I could just develop a couple of those that
Yeah.
Abby's pointed out. The point about reservable pram space is critically important, because we are absolutely 100% clear that a wheelchair user should have access to the wheelchair space, and if there is a pram there, it has to move. So there shouldn't be any sense of there should be dedicated space for dedicated users, and we just want to make sure that there's absolutely no ambiguity about that. On the ticket barriers point, sometimes there just needs to be a little bit better understanding about how difficult it is to negotiate a ticket barrier when you're trying to load up the tickets on your phone or get them out of your wallet whilst you're pushing a pram and holding the hand of a toddler. And you've got a bunch of grumpy commuters behind you who are wondering why on earth it's taking so long. If the ticket staff can see you and go, oh, we can see that there's a large family there, let's get you through nice and quickly, that's in everyone's best interest. And similarly with the assisting people on and off trains, that would reduce dwell time. So again, that could be in the train operator's interest. And there's just other things to think about in terms of slightly different priorities for a trip. If you're traveling with a young family, I don't really mind if I get the 10 o'clock train or the 10:30 train or the 11 o'clock train. I do care about whether or not I've got a table. But the way that the websites are designed, they don't really allow, you've got to go in and check every single train after you've booked it to see whether or not they've got appropriate seating. So just thinking about it slightly differently, and thinking about that families have different priorities rather than your run-of-the-mill commuter.
Okay, well, that's all fab. Look, I think we'll leave it there. But do come back, do keep on campaigning, and do tell us if you get particularly good or bad responses, because then we can publicize it and put some pressure on the train operators. But I do recognise we're not going to be quite like Germany and Norway with kind of play spaces for the moment, but I'm very glad to hear you say that there can be improvements just immediately in the way that the whole issue is approached. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Could I have one more thing?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
We wrote to all of the CEOs of the train operating companies at Christmas. We sent them a Christmas card, which was signed from my son Stanley, asking them to sign a family-friendly pledge. So this is a call out to the CEOs of all of the TOCs to sign a pledge which commits to not commissioning a new train or refurbishment that doesn't have space for prams or buggies. Thinking about family-friendly design of their toilets, signing up to the breastfeeding friendly scheme, and a couple of bits and bobs like that. We really, really would love if senior management at the TOCs would really engage with this and consider signing the pledge, knowing that this is a long-term project. And we'd just be really grateful if they would have a read of it, have a think, and also other people in the rail industry, if you could encourage the development of family-friendly travel thoughts within your industry, we would be so grateful.
Brilliant. That's a great place to end. Thank you very much, Abby and Joe.
The railways in Great Britain generally have two principal forms of passenger train operator. So the vast majority of trains are operated under franchises, or what used to be known as franchises, more recently national rail contracts, but essentially contracts that are awarded by the state for the provision of a package of services over a number of routes for a number of years. But within the setup of the rail industry in Great Britain, there's provision for something called an open access operator. And this means that a company that thinks it can identify a gap in the market which isn't being properly covered by the franchised operators can apply to the Office of Rail and Road for permission to operate those services, which to some degree run in competition with the franchised operators. The degree of competition which is allowed is a subject of some controversy, and the previous governments and this one have grappled with that controversy, because there's a suggestion sometimes that the open access operators take away or abstract the revenue of the franchised operators. And the ORR, the Office of Rail and Road, has to sort out how those arrangements are allowed to work. The present government was elected, as we know, on a pledge to return the franchised operators, those which hadn't already returned to the public sector, to a fully publicly owned system. But it was also quite enthusiastic about encouraging open access operators so that there would continue to be some competition on the system. Though since the change of Secretary of State for Transport, it appears that the new Secretary of State, Heidi Alexander, is a bit less keen on open access than her predecessor, Louise Haigh. So Christian has been exploring this interesting but somewhat complex issue with Steve Montgomery, who's the Managing Director of First Rail, which is a company trying to secure more open access rights.
I'm at a launch organised by First Group to promote the idea of open access, and they've got several applications in for some new routes as well as running some existing services. And I thought I'd have a chat with Steve Montgomery, who's Managing Director, who's made a presentation at the event, and so has agreed to do an interview with me. So, Steve, what's this about? Is it that you're trying to get into open access because you're essentially not going to have any franchises anymore?
It's been part of our strategy for a number of years of where we've been diversifying the rail portfolio. Open access has obviously been something that we carried out. We're obviously the early starts of it in 2000 with Hull Trains, and we operated that service for a number of years, and then Lumo. And we've seen the success of Lumo, and it gave us the opportunity to go and see what other markets were out there, where could we meet the untapped markets, and that's where this all came from. And it's gradually growing. Now, we all knew that it was a threat of nationalisation, so it was really important that we had other opportunities for First Group and been able to keep expanding as we've seen other opportunities go away from us, as in the franchises.
But so you've got some quite interesting, I could say, bids in, like Carmarthen and I think Rochdale and Paignton. I mean, these are places that one doesn't associate necessarily with kind of large numbers of rail users.
I think with Carmarthen, we've got those rights now that we're going to operate them.
Which you inherited from another company, didn't you?
Yeah,
we
bought them off, yes. So the expansion to Paignton is an area where we've done a lot of work in looking at the demand and the potential growth within those areas. It's not widely served at this moment in time. I think there's 3 trains a day in either direction. We're looking to try and expand that out again because, as we all know, the South West is a very popular destination, and it's almost all year round now, so we see those opportunities and being able to expand on the current services provided by GWR. Again, as I say with Lumo, we're not there to compete in terms of first class. This is going to be a standard class offering, and just trying to make sure we give people value for money and other opportunities. And we would expect to see the same benefits that LNER have seen, where the overall market grows for everybody to earn extra out of it.
So you see yourselves as an additional service and not necessarily a competitive service. I mean, can you prove that? Or because the ORR is very hot on the idea that they don't want any abstractive services.
Absolutely, and we've got to demonstrate that, and that's the work that we carry out using, different companies to analyse all the different factors of where would you bring this new patrons from. So you're right, the abstraction, non-abstractive test has to be applied by the ORR, and we support that. We are not against that, as long as it's applied fairly. Clearly, it's really important. So we've carried out that work. We believe we can demonstrate that this will bring more customers to rail, which is good for the whole industry.
Right, no, absolutely. I mean, Carmarthen would stop at several places, wouldn't it?
That's correct.
Including Cardiff.
It stops all the way from Carmarthen, then Cardiff, then Bristol.
Right. And so tell me how close we are with each of these. Carmarthen is the most advanced, isn't it?
No, the Stirling application is the most advanced. So Stirling, we are hoping to start in the summer of next year.
Right.
And that will operate 4 services from Stirling to London and 1 from Preston to London.
Up the West Coast Main Line.
Up the West Coast Main Line, yeah.
Right. And you've found paths there?
We believe there's paths there, yes. So we're working with Network Rail at the moment in time to make sure those paths are secured for next year.
That would be the first ever open access operator on the West Coast Main Line,
yes,
wouldn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so that's Stirling and then
it would be Carmarthen.
Right.
The next operation. And then obviously...
Which you have permission for.
Yeah. And then obviously we've got the additional rolling stock to strengthen the likes of Lumo and Hull trains, because again, what we're starting to come up against is capacity restraints. So we believe that we can provide more capacity, again, just to expand the number of people that's able to use rail.
Right, but Heidi Alexander wrote a letter to ORR recently, which seemed to, and I've written about it in Rail Magazine, because it seemed to pour a bit of cold water on the idea of how open they are to open access, as it were.
Yeah, I think, we're obviously want to make sure that it's... I think all the things that within the Secretary of State's letter are not things that haven't been previously asked from the ORR. So we don't think there's anything new there. Obviously, as the letter became public, that made more people aware of it. So that in itself, we should not be too frightened of, as long as the regulator is allowed to do it in an independent way, and obviously us as a potential operator are able to demonstrate that it is bringing additional value and more opportunities for people to use rail.
So you think it is compatible with a railway that is, run by Great British Railways and largely will be Great British Railways, and you think open access is compatible with that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We need to work together. We need to work as an industry, and open access is all about these new opportunities. Where the mainline operators might not have the ability to go, or the rolling stock. And again, the big important thing is this is a whole new supply, offering for the rolling stock manufacturers, and we've all heard the noises round about that. Where's the next order coming from? We've been able to take that and put virtually our money where our mouth is, and we've been able to now place an order with Angel Trains.
Yes, and that's what I've written about in Rail Magazine. But that letter did highlight the fact that you are not, apart from Lumo, paying access charges on this. And do you envisage in future you will have to pay access charges?
We do pay access charges on Hull,
right?
But it's historical charges, so
it's pretty low.
Other operators, they're not exceptionally low, but they're not at the new rates that were brought in 2021. So clearly, we don't want a free ride. Nobody's asking for a free ride in this. We're able to clearly demonstrate with Lumo that the access charges are slightly above where other operators are at this moment in time. And again, that's per mile. So the new operations, if they're successful, will have to pay those charges as per set out by the regulator.
And you'll be able to cope with that?
Yes,
you'll be able
and that's built into the models. That's built into our models to make sure that we can meet that new charges, new demand. And Lumo's is the example of that. And
your pamphlet is quite hot on the fact that this is quite widespread across Europe, that there's a lot of open access.
Yeah, all countries are opening up. As we said earlier, liberalisation is where Europe's going at this moment in time, whether it's, they're almost going to where we were 25 years ago. But open access is opening up across a number of markets. France is opening up. obviously we see that other parts of the country, Spain's opened up by quite a number of open access operators.
Yeah, Italy has two high-speed operators.
Yeah, Italy, Italio and Trenitalia.
Yeah.
So there's good opportunities there.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. That's great to hear from you. Thanks. Cheers.
Okay.
Here's Christian's final thought from the departure lounge.
Well, we've got an interesting situation with ticketing as well, because at one stage, when Great British Railways was first announced, it was basically going to be, it seemed, the sole provider of tickets, and that you'd have to buy your tickets through this one organisation. And of course, there are existing rival organisations like Trainline and various other companies who are third-party retailers of the tickets who would greatly have objected to this. It always seemed a strange idea coming from a Tory government. And no, not surprisingly, the Tory government then ditched that and said, no, we're going to let 1,000 flowers bloom, and we're going to kind of allow lots of private operators, and we're going to encourage tickets to be sold by third parties. And now we've had an announcement from the Labour government that basically they're going to encourage Great British Railways to have a ticketing arm and sell lots of tickets, but they're also going to allow these kind of third-party retailers. But how that precisely works is going to be quite complex. And indeed, is it possible for these third-party operators, who sometimes charge an extra booking fee, by the way, to actually compete? Or maybe will it be difficult for Great British Railways to compete with these kind of commercial people? So watch this space, but this will be another interesting aspect where private and public interests might clash.
Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast with Christian Walmart, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media channels, including Blue Sky, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle on X is @AllStationsPod.